Good morning. Today is 25 January 2013. My name is Frank Kastner, and I'm a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in our country's military conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum along with fellow volunteer Wayne Swanson, and today we have the honor and the privilege of interviewing Sergeant Ernie Reyes. Sergeant Reyes is a Vietnam veteran and has some interesting things to talk about in his career choices and his military assignments. Sergeant Reyes, it's a pleasure to have you here, and we look forward to hearing your story. I'd like you first to please state your full name, and if you would, spell your last name, please.
Ernest Frank Reyes, R-E-Y-E-S.
And when and where were you born, Sergeant?
August 1st, 1945, Banning, California.
What are some of your early memories of Banning?
I really didn't have, my grandmother lived there. I was born in her home. Mm-hmm. And everybody in our family, the rest of my brothers and sisters were born here in Palm Springs. But my parents used to go to Banning for the summer.
Okay.
And visit with grandma and things like that.
Where did you spend most of your time then growing up?
Right here in Palm Springs in Section 14.
Oh, okay.
On the Indian Reservation.
Your father's name?
Frank.
Frank, and your mother's name?
Trinidad.
Do you know her maiden name?
Olivera.
Okay. And what did your father do for a living?
Well, he was a laborer first, and then he worked at O'Donnell Golf Course as a greenskeeper. Mm. And then he ran the Rancho Mirage Water District Company in Rancho Mirage.
Did your mother work?
No, mainly she was at home with the family.
And you mentioned brothers and sisters?
5 brothers and 2 sisters.
Can you name them all?
Yes. 2 sisters, Faustina and Candelaria. Raymond, Frank, Vic, Carlos.
And where are you in the...
I'm the youngest.
Okay. When you came to Palm Springs then, you were here as a child?
Yes.
Do you have some memories of the village?
Well, Dad built the house on the reservation. We paid our rent at a trailer park. Mm-hmm. And we lived on Arenas Road, right next to Our Lady of Guadalupe. And we lived there until I think it was in 9th grade I moved out of there because they were moving everybody out of the reservation for development. And we moved out to Cathedral City on Eagle Canyon Drive.
Now, you mentioned reservation in Area 14. For those who aren't familiar with our history, can you tell us a little bit about the way the Palm Springs area was divided up and some of the significance of Area 14?
Well, I think it ran, I don't know all the streets now because I haven't lived here in a long time, mm-hmm. But it's a square mile, and from Indian Avenue over to Sunrise, and then down Ramon Road, and I don't remember the street on the north side, but there was a cross-section of whites, Mexicans, Indians, and there was some nice homes in there, and trailer parks, but the majority of the streets were not paved, and Section 14 was considered not a very good part of town, mm-hmm. compared to now.
Mm-hmm. And just for clarification, when you talk about these square miles, every other square mile was designated as reservation?
Well, they said there's like a checkerboard effect or something like that, and yes,
And Area 14 was one of those areas that was designated as Indian reservation land?
Yes.
And there was some really significant issues in our kind of local social history regarding Area 14. When they cleared it out, I know it created some hard feelings.
Well, the blacks, from what I understand, they moved to the north end of town and up to Banning. And when they told us that we had to move, my dad just moved us, and some of the people didn't want to leave,
Mm-hmm.
and they ran through some hardships because of that.
And there was some resentment in terms of being uprooted, and I know that many of the black families did settle in what is now the Gateway area.
Yes, the
that
North
kind of
End.
opened that
Yes.
that area up. Are any of those buildings still there?
On the reservation?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say the ones that I knew of growing up, no.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is either flat now, or they have apartments down there and restaurants. And if you go up my street west to Indian Avenue, the Foster Freeze used to be on the corner there, and Hatchett's Market, and there was a TV store there on the corner, and I think it moved out to Cathedral City. But yeah, that's basically it. I mean, my lot that I grew up on, where our home was, it's still empty
Mm-hmm.
today.
Mm-hmm.
And but everything else basically has been, like where I think there's a pizza parlor there on, is that McCullum Way?
Mm-hmm. It's Bill's or something like that. Bill's Pizza or
I do not.
okay. Yeah.
I thought it was Shakey's, but
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah, at Talkwitz or Avenida Caballeros. Yeah.
and the Indian cemeteries there on the reservation, and
Mm-hmm.
as kids we used to walk from the reservation over to Angel Stadium, which we used to call the Polo Grounds,
Mm-hmm.
and we played little league softball, played my high school baseball there,
Mm-hmm.
but then from there we used to walk to the Village Theater and on Palm Canyon, or the Plaza Theater. And growing up through high school, I belonged to the youth center,
Mm-hmm.
and but it was all. I didn't know any better. I thought I lived a good life.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad took care of me and our family, so everything was pretty good.
What do you know of your parents' backgrounds?
Well,
Their heritage?
they both came from Mexico, and my dad was he'd come over and work, and he went back and forth, and he really never really talked to me about that much. And then while he was here, I remember going in his little Ford 50 Ford to Riverside, and said, "You want to go along for a ride?" And he was driving there to become a citizen and taking the classes.
Mm.
And then shortly after that, my mother did the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
to become a citizen.
Mm-hmm. Was Spanish the language of the family, or?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Both my dad was bilingual in both. He could read and write Spanish and English. My mother, she could speak both languages, and but predominantly we spoke Spanish at
Mhm.
home.
Just more of an issue of comfort.
Yes.
Yeah. Where did you start school?
I went to school at Francis Stevens, there on Palm Canyon Drive.
And that's now kind of an art center, and
Yes.
the buildings are still there, but it's not a school anymore.
No.
And
All the kids from the reservation went there.
did you walk? Did you?
To school?
Yeah.
No. There was a bus that came in and took you there and brought you home.
And junior high or middle school?
Junior high, Nellie Kaufman.
Okay.
It was next to the high school
I
back
was going to
then.
say it was still part of the high school back then on Baristo, on the Baristo side of the campus.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of the teachers or any favorite subjects?
Well, the principal back then was Mr. Linville, and some of the counselors were, I think it was some lady, I think her name was McCarthy, and another gentleman who I'm good friends with, his son now, was Mr. Ossaker.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Renner, he was one of my favorite teachers. His son ended up being a pro golfer.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a Jahelka science teacher. Mr. Givens, the music teacher. I was in the choir, and I don't even know why. I can't sing. But, yeah, that was about it.
Mm-hmm. And then high school, you moved just across campus to Palm Springs High?
Yes.
And what do you remember about high school?
Well, I played football, baseball, and basketball, and I was a four-year letterman in baseball. Played football for 3 years and varsity basketball for one. And basically, that always took up all my time year round. So, practice after school, go home, whatever. But it was a good experience, and the one experience that I'll always remember is that my varsity football coach was Brownfield. And he told us that, and I'm finding this very hard right now to talk about this because he passed away. Can you shut off?
Yeah, go ahead.
Anyways, when he was, I was a junior, and they told us all to report to the music room, and you're going to meet your new football coach. And he told us that we're going to be DVL champions next year. And I kind of laughed because the year before, we weren't very good. But we ended up being the champions.
Wow.
And we went to the playoffs. And we couldn't play Friday in the first round of the playoffs at Mount Sac against Gary High School in Pomona. We're supposed to, and because that Friday, that's when Kennedy was killed. So they canceled the game until Tuesday, and then we went up there and played them, and we were fortunate enough to beat them. And we got knocked off in the second round. But he was a very good coach, and I had a lot of good memories with him. But, all right, we'll go to another.
How big was Palm Springs High at the time? Do you have any idea?
Well, our graduating class was pretty close to 350, and I think around there, and maybe 1,200, between 12 and 1,500, about that.
So if you were a senior in '63 when the Kennedy assassination, you graduated then in June of '64?
Yes.
Did you have odd jobs and things like that while you were growing up?
Yes, there was an old Hancock gas station in Cathedral City. I pumped gas there on weekends. I worked with my older brother. He was a gardener in Smoke Tree Ranch. I read meters with my dad out in Rancho Mirage with, well, I think that, not all the time, but just once in a while.
What about summers here?
Well, I worked with my brother in the gardening job in the summer, and work construction in the summer, Little Terrazzo and Gun Night at Go-Go and things like that. And I also tended for my brother-in-law. He was a brick mason. His name was Martin Flores. But I got used to the heat. We played baseball in the summer, and we went through Hell Week for football, and it was always hot here. And I always wondered how I wonder now how we got through all that. But when I was in high school, I was an ASB officer. I was the commissioner of athletics and varsity club president, and they sent me to Boys State in Sacramento during the summer of my junior and senior year. And that was a great experience. We got to go up to the Capitol, and we lived there on the fairgrounds for, I guess, maybe a week or so.
And ASB is the Associated Student Body. It's kind of the student government for the school. And you had elected officers each year.
Yes.
You remember who the ASB president was?
David Kennedy.
Oh, okay.
And our senior class president was Wayne Walker. And but go ahead.
Was your house that you mentioned your dad built? Was there any cooling, any air conditioning?
No.
Swamp coolers?
Swamp cooler, yes. We had a shower and a bathroom. No sink in the bathroom. We brushed our teeth in the sink in the kitchen, or I went outside to the faucet. But it was different, but I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I grew up, and I wasn't missing anything I didn't know.
Yeah. And a family of 7 brothers and sisters, including yourself. Any problems with just food and clothes and?
No, we never worried about stuff like that. My dad always provided the necessities, and again, we didn't know any better, but I thought we did very well there.
When you moved to Cathedral City, when you were still in school.
We moved when I was going into the 9th grade.
Okay, but there was still only one high school. Everybody came
Yes.
to Palm Springs High School because Cathedral City High School wasn't opened until, I believe, 92 or something like that. So basically this end of the valley all went to Palm Springs High School.
Yeah, all the way from Rancho Mirage, Thousand Palms, the north end, Desert Hot Springs. They all went to Palm Springs.
Where was graduation held?
In the high school auditorium.
In the auditorium?
Yeah, the big one there at the school.
Okay.
Well, it was big when I was there.
Yeah. It's still in use and still in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
They didn't have graduation in the stadium.
No.
Okay. Because I remember later on, when I was there beginning in 70, we had graduation in the stadium, and it was always the hottest Thursday or Friday of the month, and it was always windy. When you graduated from high school, what did you plan? What did you think you wanted to do? This was in June of 64.
Well, I ended up going out to COD, College of the Desert, and I played football out there for 2 games, and that ended my career there. When I was in high school, I graduated about 145 pounds, and I was kind of small. I had fairly good speed, but at the college level, they told me to gain a little bit of weight. So over the summer, because I was working construction, probably shouldn't be saying this, but I drank a little beer. And I shot up to about 175 pounds. I gained like 30 pounds over the summer. And so the coach told me, he says, maybe you can't run anymore. Well, it didn't take long because with the heat and everything, I lost it all back again. So I played at about 150 pounds, but it was very difficult because, it's a different level, and I wasn't that good.
What were you studying?
Well, it was just, your junior college is just still requirements, and I always wanted to be a coach. And I was lucky enough to be a coach for 31 years.
Yeah, okay. With that in mind, what were your plans after junior college?
Well, my junior college career didn't last very long because my dad had a heart attack and I had to go to work. And then at that time, if you didn't stay in college and keep up your credits, then you became draft eligible. So I didn't keep up my credits, and so I got drafted.
Were any of your brothers or
My brothers-
sisters in the service?
Oh, yeah. One of my brothers, Victor, he was in the National Guard. That's what he served, and his war experience were the Watts riots in Los Angeles. But my brother Carlos, he served in the Army, and he was in Korea. That's where he served his time. My brother Raymond.
What did he do in Korea?
I think he was like an office clerk or something like that. And my brother Frank, my oldest one, he also went to Korea, and my brother Raymond went to Korea.
To your knowledge, did your dad serve in the military in any way?
No.
Do you have any memories of Korea, of the news, the family talking, letters back and forth?
No, because I was too young, and there's almost 40 years between my oldest brother and myself.
Wow.
Just roughly thinking.
When in 1964, what was the talk in terms of Vietnam?
I wasn't really paying attention that much because I was in school and I was working and that type of stuff, and then when then I got drafted, and when I got drafted, I ended up, and I figured if I'm drafted, Vietnam's going on, I'll probably end up being a grunt with a rifle, and I didn't know it at the time or anything like that, but and it's been a long time, so I don't remember the sequence. But I went to Fort Ord, and there they gave us some tests, and this guy sat with me and he said, "Would you be interested in volunteering for another year?" And I said no. And
What was the draft time at that point? If you were drafted, how long was your active duty?
2 years.
2 years, okay.
And he says, "Well, I'm going to offer you something, and you tell me if you want to take it." He says, "Right now over here in this hand, you're going to probably go airborne. I mean infantry, and over here on this hand, we think you can do communications." And I says, "Well, does that mean I'm going to be on the radio and still be out there?" And they go, "No, this is teletype communications. We've looked at your record and you've never been in trouble, so maybe you could, qualify for some type of clearance. But because your school is, I can't remember, my school was like from February to June, so like 5 months. So they said you'd have to volunteer for another year." And then he told me that the type of work that you will do in this communications center, if it's too cold, they're going to have heaters because of the equipment. And then if it's hot, it'd have to be air conditioned. So I said, "Well, that sounds pretty good." So I took the other year.
Mm-hmm.
And then they gave me a clearance.
I'm just curious, having older siblings already in the service, you say most of them were in Korea. Was there any thought of you enlisting rather than waiting to be drafted?
No.
Any particular reason, or?
Well, I mean, I knew Vietnam was happening, and a lot of my buddies were getting drafted and going in. And when it was I thought it was unusual, but when I got drafted with a guy named D.AVE, Section 14, a guy named Harry Carusage, Bruce Hamilton, Tommy Cardona, Jeff Dunnington, and we all went at the same time. And bless their hearts, most of them got pretty good jobs, MPs. Duran was an MP, and Carusage ended up going to OCS. And then Dunnington, not a very good lucky guy. He ended up in the infantry, and Cardona was in radio communications, and I went to teletype.
What do you think it was about those tests or your background that led them to that decision about communications?
To be honest with you, I really don't know. And there's a lot of things I didn't know that were going on. And the one thing that I'd like to share with you is that we went through an unclassified area of the school first, and that's learning the teletype equipment, and they gave us tests and stuff like that. And then we went to the classified part, and there was about 4 platoons, 40 in a platoon. So when we went to the classified area, when we got through with that school, and this is what I mean, I didn't understand what was going on. And what I'm leading up to is that after we finished school and graduated, the very next day we wake up and everybody got in formation, and there was 160 guys out there, roughly. And 159 of them went to Europe, to France, to Germany, to Spain, and whatever, Italy, and I'm the only one left. And I said, "Where's my orders?" And they said, "Your orders didn't come through." Says, "You're a holdover, so you go back to your tent." And what am I going to do? And he said, "Well, you just sit there and eat 3 times a day and just wait till your orders come in." So I was there for maybe about a week. They finally called me up and said, "Go see the first sergeant." He gave me my orders. And he says, "You're going to Vietnam." And I go, "Great." So, but I still had in the back of my mind, I'm going to probably be all right because of the job that I had. But then I looked at my orders, and I even asked the first sergeant, "Where am I going?" And he looked at my orders, and all my orders showed that it was like, there weren't any words, there were a couple abbreviations and numbers. And he couldn't tell me. So I came back home, and my girlfriend that I had at one time, her father was in the Marines, and he was a fighter pilot, and I showed him, and he couldn't tell me. So now I'm on the plane flying to Vietnam, and there's an officer sitting next to me, and he says, I said to him, "Sir, could you tell me where I'm going when I get there?" And he looked at my orders, and he says, "I'm sorry, I can't tell you. I don't know. I don't know. I can't interpret those numbers or those letters." Anyways, we land in Saigon, and that was a great experience. You know, usually a plane comes in kind of level. You know, they're coming in almost vertical. And, you know, you get off the plane, you walk off, and that humidity hits you, and you hear the choppers all around you. And anyways,
was it a military plane or civilian?
Civilian. So then we land there in Saigon, and it was Tom Sanut Air Base. So I go to a tent, throw my stuff down, and still don't know where I'm going. And the next morning they call my name out, and they said, "Get in a bus." So I get in this bus, and they take me downtown Saigon. And they pull up to a hotel, and they, this is where you're staying. I go, "What?" So I go, and it was called the Mayakor Hotel. So I go up there, maybe the 5th floor and all that. They still had bunks in those hotels and everything. They didn't have lavish beds or anything. But
so this was a property that the military had taken over for their use?
Yes. So the next, you know, and they said, "Well, you should stay here until they call you down." So I was kind of scared. I was kind of nervous, and so I went to bed that night. And you know, at the hotel, they had a restaurant down below, like little small PX and that type of thing, if you needed anything. So they woke me up the next morning, and I got in a little Jeep, and we went down to, now that I know what it is, it was MACV headquarters.
And what is that?
Military Assistant Command Vietnam. So, and still, I didn't know who the big shot was there. I just thought, I'm going there. So I walk into this communications center, and they give me a little orientation and everything, and then and they tell me that's General Westmolrland'S headquarters. So I go, So anyways, I learned my job there, and you know, the first thing you do is you receive messages, and you put them in the right box of where they're going to go and that type of thing, and you roll up the tape and attach it to the message, and that's all you do in the beginning till they find out more about where they could use you best.
What rank are you now?
I went over there as a PFC.
Okay. Did you fly in uniform?
Yes.
Class A?
No. Khaki.
Okay. There's going to be a lot to this story, but there are a couple of things I need to ask you, kind of going back a little bit. One of the things that slipped my mind was, in high school or in junior college, did you have, you mentioned a girlfriend, did you have a steady girlfriend, or was there someone that you ended up corresponding with while you were overseas, other than perhaps family?
In the beginning, but no, not after maybe about 2 months. There was no point in it to me.
Did you correspond with family members at all?
Yes, yes. And some of my friends.
And you were able to receive mail fairly?
Oh yeah, there was no problem with mail.
I want to go back. You mentioned did you have boot camp at Fort Ord?
Yes.
How did you get from Cathedral City to Fort Ord?
Well, they took us to Los Angeles. God, I wish I could remember that hotel because I still see it in old movies. But they took us somewhere in Los Angeles, and that's where they took our blood and our physical, and that's where they saw us in.
Kind of an induction center.
Yeah, yes.
When you got your draft notice, how long was it between that notice and when you actually had to report?
I think it was in August that I got it, and I think in November I went in, November 15th.
Did you go back to school during that time, or knowing you had to go in November, did you just work, or?
No, I was working because Well, I had one very positive job that I ended up having before I went into service. My brother Raymond, the one that went to Korea, he worked for the city of Palm Springs in the grounds, and one of his responsibilities was back then was the Polo Grounds, which is now Angel State. Was we changed Angel Stadium? I don't know what they call it now.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a groundskeeper there, and I was working construction. And he says, during spring training, would you like to work for me here? And for the Angels, well, they're here in spring training. I said, oh, sure, I love baseball. So they gave me the mound, and that's all I took care of was the mound.
Mm.
And that was my job during spring training. So I really enjoyed that, seeing all the...
And you got to interact with the players and...
Oh, well, I didn't bother the players, but yeah, sometimes, they would say hello to you, and you'd have to sit down and have a conversation.
Do you remember any in particular, or...
Well, when the Cubs came to town, I was sitting at the end of the dugout on a folding chair, and there was two other ones there. And Ernie Banks came up and sat next to me, and so we started talking and that type of thing. But oh yeah, got to talk to quite a few of them, and I got to see Drysdale, I got to see Koufax, Carl Yastrzemski. I mean, all the Giants, Mays, and I mean, it was a great experience. Doing that there for that spring, and then shortly after, that's when I went in.
And how did, again, you were drafted along with a number of other guys from this area. Did you all go together to boot?
The guys that I told you about earlier?
To the
Yes.
induction center by bus?
We went from Indio on a bus to Los Angeles. And then after we went through our process in Los Angeles, they put us up in some hotel there in Los Angeles. I used to remember it, but I don't remember it now. And the next morning, they woke us up out of the hotel and put us on another bus up to Fort Ord.
What did you take with you?
Probably nothing. They told us, just to, probably Levi's and, nothing really.
Were you given uniforms in Los Angeles or?
No, Ord.
Ord, okay.
We got our haircuts there too.
And so this is November. What's the weather like?
Well, up there they call it liquid sunshine. Rain. November, it rained just about every day during boot camp, but not every day.
Fort Ord is close to...
Well, what is it? Pebble Beach, Monterey, that area.
South of San Francisco.
Yes.
Now, and this is the Army. It's the Army's boot camp. What's your impression of boot camp?
Well, there was a man here. His name was Howard Haddock. He used to be the recreation director here for the city. And I think I was in junior high, and he asked me if I want to go to summer camp. And I said, and my parents couldn't afford to send me to summer camp or anything like that, and I'd never been away from home. He said, well, it's not really a summer camp. I said, it's a Devil Pup program down in Camp Pendleton. So I said, sure, I'll go. So I went and I participated in that. And being an 8th grader, it was pretty tough. But it was a good experience.
But having the athletic training that you had, you were probably ahead of some of the other guys.
Well, I was very fortunate in the Army when I went for basic training. It was very easy for me. And, I mean, push-ups and sit-ups and running and jogging were a piece of cake. It was nothing.
How about the drill instructors?
Well, it was really kind of funny because my drill instructor's last name was Reyes. And we were in one of the activities where we were doing hand-to-hand, little fighting, you might call it. And I had a partner, and he showed us how you're supposed to do a chokehold from behind, and he was my friend, and I grabbed him, and maybe 40, 50%, and Sergeant Reyes came over and says, no, that's not how you do it. I'm going to show you how you do it. And he got me, and he really choked me out and threw me down. And so but other than that, it was pretty easy. And I stayed out. The one thing that I stayed out of trouble, and I wasn't mouthy or anything like that, so I never had any problems with that.
How long was basic training at that time?
They told us, I think it was supposed to be 8 weeks, but I think it was maybe, but see, they worked us every weekend too. I mean, we weren't going anywhere. It was straight through.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say maybe 6.5 weeks.
Okay. And at some point, did this conversation about what you would do in communications come up?
That was in the beginning when we first got there,
Okay.
when they tested us.
So you knew all along that after basic, this is what you'd be doing?
Yeah, I'd be going to Fort Gordon, Georgia for a communication school.
And when was that?
When did that start?
Yeah.
I'm going to say either the first part of February or January.
Mm-hmm.
And
Of 65.
yes,
And how did you get to Georgia?
we flew. And the other experiences there that were kind of funny. Well, one was funny, the other one wasn't so funny. I knew a black gentleman from San Bernardino that was in basic training with me, and he was going down there too. And we ended up on the same plane, and we landed. We landed in Atlanta, then we took a puddle jumper over to Augusta. And there was a hotel there in Augusta, and Tommy Cardona, my other buddy, he was in radio, so it was the three of us. And I says, you know, it's 12:30 at night, 1 o'clock in the morning. We don't have to report till tomorrow. Let's just get a hotel room. And we were in our greens there, and me being naive, I guess, not worldly, I go up to the register there, and I said, I'd like a room. And, well, how many for? And I said, 3. And the guy looked over there, and he saw Tommy, and saw me, and he saw this black guy, and he said, no, just 2. And my black friend said, I told him, I says, just stand back. Don't worry about it. So I got the room. I turned around and told my buddy that, you know, I says, look, you just stand out here, and I'll come back and get you after I put our stuff away in the room, and they're not going to know anything about it. We'll just walk up. And he stayed with us. Mm-hmm. And then I ran into the prejudice in the restaurants too, and he was the same guy. We went to breakfast. You know, it was the first weekend pass we had. We went to Augusta, and we were sitting in a place there. We had a hotel room there, and we went down to have breakfast, and they wouldn't wait on us. And I finally grabbed the waitress, and I said, well, how about us? Because we don't serve blacks. Hmm. So that was, I guess it didn't make a difference if you were serving your country. Hmm. And so, yeah, that was kind of a bad experience.
What was his reaction?
Well, after the first one, he wasn't too happy. But after the first one, you know, anything that happened after that, he was expecting it. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we just didn't worry about it anymore, and just, you know, we didn't make any trouble about it, and we just went about our way. The only time that I ever made a big deal about it, and everybody said I was crazy to do it, I was being discharged. I left Panama and I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I had to stay there like maybe a day before I had to ship back out here, be discharged to California. And I went down to like a Thrifty's or, you know, a Rite Aid, but it was probably a Thrifty's, a department store. Mm-hmm. And I'm in line, and I needed some cologne, or I don't remember what I needed, but I was in line, and in front of me was this black lady. And I was next, and then they were ringing up somebody else. Well, this wide angle lady, she comes up and gets right in front of the black lady. It says, you're not going before me. And I'm behind the black lady. And I've got my fatigues on and everything, and I'm going, no. So, and if I would tell this story and said I never did anything, somebody would say, what's wrong with you? So what I did was, I waited right before the checker was going to check her out. And I went right in front of her with my stuff. And I actually pushed her back. And she told me to keep her hands off her. And then I grabbed the black lady by her hand, and I put her in front of me. And I said, go ahead, you're first. Mm-hmm. And that was the last experience I saw of prejudice and you know, in the South. But
was there ever any against you?
No. The one thing I'll tell you that it was really great experience in the South. I woke up one Sunday morning, And I went down to chow, and I'm sitting and I'm reading the sports page. Well, I look at the sports page. This is the Masters tournament is going on, the final round. Okay, so I read the article, and at the bottom of the article says, if you come in Army or military uniform, you get to come in free. And I go, so my buddy next to me, I says, hey, Pitts, you want to go to the Masters? And he goes, yeah. So we get on a bus, we take it to Augusta, the city. Then we get a cab, and we take it to the golf course. And I'm not kidding you. That cab took us, if you look at it on TV, with the trees that are over the road, we rode right down that middle, and there's the clubhouse, and there's a circle that goes around it. Well, on the right-hand side, they dropped us off right there. And the first tee was maybe, 100 yards from there, down the road. And I watched the Masters for 0. Jack Nicklaus won it that year. But what a place. And, I've said to myself here lately, because I play a little golf, but I'm not very good. But I said maybe for my 50th anniversary of that tournament, I might write him a letter and say, hey, if I wear my uniform, can I get in free? But I doubt it.
Absolutely. Were there signs around there, though, at restroom facilities and water fountains about...
You know what?
No blacks, no...
I didn't really... No, I didn't notice that. I didn't, and I don't know why. Mm-hmm. And maybe I just wasn't looking that way or whatever.
And the black friend you were with, there was nothing like that in Los Angeles or in California that you recall?
No.
Were you aware of this possibility in the South? Had you even thought about it, or?
No, I really didn't think about it, and I just reacted to the situation, and when it happened, and I tried to use good judgment, and that was about it. The other thing that happened, it was kind of funny. It's my first experience in a restaurant in the South was breakfast. So right off the bat, breakfast to me is very simple. I want eggs over easy, hash browns, and bacon, and toast, cup of coffee. Well, the waitress gives me a menu, and I said, I don't need it. So she says, okay, what do you want? So I said that. And she says, hash browns, what is that? We don't serve hash browns. And I said, well, they're like fried potatoes. No. She says, we serve grits with our breakfast meal. So I turned around and I said, well, what is grits? And I said, well, it doesn't matter. Bring me the grits. So I learned to like grits. Mm-hmm. But that was kind of funny that I couldn't. And then in my travels across country, this is, I have a motorhome, and I'm in the back east somewhere, and we pull into this restaurant, and I said, I like a hamburger, French fries and a Coke, whatever. My wife says the same thing, and my son says the same thing. And they brought us a bun and a piece of meat. Okay, and I look at her and I go, where's the lettuce? Where's the tomato? Where's the onion? Where's the mayonnaise? She says, you didn't ask for that. You asked for a hamburger. That's a hamburger. And then she says, if you want all that stuff, then you tell me you want a California burger. I go, okay. So, anyways.
The communication school you mentioned was at Fort Gordon?
Yes.
And that was very close to Augusta? Was that the closest town, probably?
Yeah, it was pretty close.
And how long was that school?
I can't remember, about from 1st of February till June.
Mm-hmm. And basically what did you do?
Where?
At the school, at the Fort Gordon.
Well, like I said before, the first part of it was, just learning. I took typing in high school, so I could type. It was no big deal. I mean, I could only type, in high school, maybe 35 words a minute. So when I got to school, the teletype is different than the regular typewriter. So I had to learn a little bit about that, but otherwise it's basically the same thing. And in the end, on that machine, after Vietnam and everything, I got up to about 85 words a minute. It's so. Then when I went to the classified area, you know, they showed you all the things about breaking messages and, you know, where to look for it on the when the message comes in on code, where to look on the message. They're going to give you some type of sign in there that you're going to use that numerical sign or whatever, and you're going to go over to the book, and that little thing's going to tell you, you know, this is what you got to type in, and when you type it in and you send the tape through, it comes out in English.
Because this record will be seen by perhaps present generations and future generations that certainly don't know what a teletype is. How would you describe that?
Well, it's pretty close to a typewriter. It was black, and if I remember correctly, I think a typewriter now has four. Oh, they don't even have typewriters anymore. It's all computers. Mm-hmm. But a typewriter had 4 rows, and a teletype machine had 3 rows. So you had to go uppercase on a lot of things and whatever. Mm-hmm.
And when you typed a message there, did it automatically go someplace else, or did you send it?
No, what happens when you type out a message is you get a tape. Mm-hmm. And this little tape has holes in it. And all those holes represent letters and spaces and the carriage. It moves it up so they don't overlap and that type of thing.
And what do you do with that?
That's what you send the tape.
How?
Well, there's a machine next to where your outgoing machines are, and you just start it and flip it over and send it, because on that tape is the address of where it's going and is on there.
Mm-hmm. And then when the message shows up on a similar teletype machine where it's printed out at the other end?
Yes, you get a hard copy and you get that tape.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the security issues, your clearance and all that?
What about it?
How did that come about, and what kind of things did you have to sign?
Well, the only thing they told me was that I'd have to get a top secret crypto clearance, and I said, well, how are you going to find stuff out about me? I mean, I don't know, you know, how they investigate to clear me or all this type of stuff. Well, I found out later that when I came back home on leave or after I got out of the service, and I ran into some of my ex-teachers and Judge Terrio and things like that, and I was buddies with Judge Terrio's son, Tim, and they all told me that somebody came to the house or somebody came to the school and they started asking questions about me.
Hmm. And you didn't know that until sometime afterwards?
No, I was very naive as far as how they would investigate things like that.
And they didn't tell you any of that? You didn't have to sign permissions for them to talk to somebody else, or?
Well, I don't remember, but I probably did, because that's what that was going to be my job, and they said, you know, we have to do this process and everything. So before I went to the classified area, I had this clearance.
How many were in that class? Do you have any idea?
I'm going to say about 160.
To your knowledge, was anybody not cleared?
No, I didn't have I didn't have access to that.
Mm-hmm. And when
but everybody went into that the classified area, you had to be cleared. Mm-hmm. They had it was like about anywhere, I can't remember exactly, but maybe 3 to 5 story brick building, and then like a 50, 60 foot high fence all the way around it with barbed wire.
Mm. What was housing like?
That was interesting, because the barracks, first they put us in a wooden barracks, and it was cold. It was there in February, and they had like furnaces, and guys were finding letters in cracks and crevices, because they used to bring back the Germans and put them in jail there in Fort Gordon. And it was very crowded, so they asked for volunteers of who wanted to go into a 6-man tent, you know, behind the barracks next to the mess hall. I put up my hand. And so you instead of sleeping with a floor of guys, you know, I don't know, 50 guys. You know, I was in a 6-man tent, and I don't know why, but yeah, we had a little burning stove there, but it was a lot warmer in that tent than it was in that barracks.
Mm.
So it was kind of nice.
And were you promoted as a result of your training, or?
I went to Vietnam as a PFC,
Okay.
and while I was in Vietnam, I made E4.
Okay. Now the school lasted about
4 to 5 months, 5 months.
So after it was over, what happened next?
Well, that I think I told you, but it was like about 160 guys.
That's when that story. Okay. And you then immediately went.
Then I got my orders and I came home. It was June,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a 30-day leave. And the big joke at all the parties that I went to, they says, "What do you know?" Some of the kids didn't even know I was in the service. They're away at college or whatever. And they, "Hey, what are you doing now, Ernie?" And I says, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I go, "I'm going to be a foreign exchange student in Vietnam." So they laughed. So they knew I was going over there. But yeah, the 30 days was kind of neat. You know, you were on leave and then you leave.
Mm-hmm. And where did you leave from?
I left from Palm Springs. My buddy took me to LAX, and from there I went up to Oakland, and then whatever that Air Force base is up north of Oakland. Is it Travis or I'm not sure, but
And you say it was a civilian aircraft.
that I flew to Vietnam in?
Yeah.
Yes.
But it was all military, or did you just book?
No, all military.
So there wasn't regular passenger service at that time, or this was a charter, something like that?
Yeah, it was a charter.
Okay. And now you described landing and then reporting to this office. Kind of take up the story from there about your orientation in the headquarters and.
Well, they took you to a room and they sat you in there, and because we're going to live in downtown Saigon, they told you about, the bars, and you're going to want to go drink and do these different things, and one of the things that always stuck in my mind was they told you that whatever you do, don't get in a fight with the Vietnamese. He says because they don't have calcium in their diet, and their bones are very brittle. You could hit one of them and in the face and maybe just crack all their face up. So, and they told you the do's and don'ts and that type of thing, and play the areas to stay out of and things not to ride or whatever. And they told us to stay off the Cicalos. You could take a cab or a bus, or they had military buses for transportation.
The Cicalos were the bicycle pedal.
Yeah, they had the 2 wheels in front and one in back. Mm-hmm. And they had motors on some or bikes, like you said.
Mm-hmm. What was your knowledge of our involvement in Vietnam at that time?
Well, I'll go beyond that because, because I was there basically like a civilian in the town, and we had Vietnamese people working in MACV as janitors, or there was boys there that would carry things for you, this type of thing, and they spoke English, and when I would talk to them, they were happy that we were over there and trying to help them or whatever. And maybe I was naive in that part to believe that, but when I was there, I thought we were doing something worthwhile. And even when I came back, I heard all the horror stories, but I never experienced them. Mm. I mean, people were telling me when they're going through airports or whatever, people would yell at them and say different things. And I was in uniform, and they never said a word to me. Maybe I was just lucky.
And this was in late '65?
When I came back, I was in Vietnam from 66 June to 67 June.
Okay, June of '66.
The tail end of my 67, like when I first got over there, I think there were maybe 150, 175,000 troops there. And when I left there, the big buildup started, and they shot up to like 450,000 or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And now continue the story in the headquarters. What were you doing, and how did that evolve into
What I ended up doing.
Yeah.
Okay, I started out in receiving messages, and I would, if it was a clear message, I would just roll up the tape, staple it to the message, hard copy that came over, and I would look at the address, and we had different windows, and I would throw them in these different windows where they're going to go, and we had different windows for classified, unclassified, you know. I can't remember now, but there are signs on the message that tell you how fast, you know, you have to take care of this message. Some of them had low priority, some had high, and you could tell that on the message, and they went on different boxes. So after you, that's what the rookies do. They receive messages. Basically, that's the easiest thing that you do there. And then after a while, one of the guys that was leaving, he was working, and I was probably in country maybe 3 months, and they tried me out on the typing thing, and I did okay, and it was no big deal. And then this is typing outgoing messages. So then from there was a gentleman that was leaving, and he worked the service department. So anything that's wrong with messages, you have to correct them one way or another. So they asked me if I'd like to do that. I said, sure, I'll do it.
What do you mean wrong with messages?
Garbled messages. In other words, like there might be, if it's a 3-page message, in page 2 on line 13, on line 13 they overlapped. Mm. Okay, after a while, because I was in that department, when that tape came out with the holes in it, I learned what those holes meant. And I had a hole punch that I could punch that thing, and then I could send it through and it'd be ungarbled. Mm. But if I couldn't do that, then I'd have to look at the originator of the message and tell them where it'd be a short, like 1-line message that said, message such and such, number from you, line, page 2, whatever, line 2, and you'd send off the message, and they'd send you a correct copy of that page or that line.
So that hole you punched either created like a line break so that it wouldn't overlap?
Yes.
So the machine would know to start over
Yes.
again? Okay. Kind of describe your surroundings. What kind of facility were you in? Where was it located?
Well, MACV headquarters was basically down the street from the Imperial Palace, and maybe about half a mile. And the place, you know, they had MPs out front with 50 back drums, and you know, out front, and they were guarding the place. And the building was probably maybe, you know, looking back on it, maybe 40 by 40. And you know, you walk in and you have the commanding officer that runs the communication center, but he's not in the communication center. And then you have his clerk or whatever there, and that's where they sit. And then the door's there, but the only people that can go through that door are whoever need to know or have access. So you go in there, and the first thing that you see is where the guys are typing, and over there is where the receiving machines. And then you start walking back, and there's an area probably about as big as this where they repair the teletype machines, the service department for that. And then and then you go to another little room, probably not even as big as this, where the service department, where I worked, and that's where you corrected everything. Then there was another room, probably with the wall twice as long as this one, as high as this, and there was nothing but weapons up there, hanging. Anything from carbines to... See, when I first got over there, the M16 wasn't in. Mm-hmm. The M14 was still being used. But they had they had grenades up there, they had everything up there. So if you were attacked, you go back there and you better get one of those. But...
what were you trained to use?
45 and the M14.
But you didn't carry anything with you on a regular basis.
No.
And you were obviously in uniform on duty in this task.
Yes, fatigues.
When you went outside that building?
Well, when I got back to my hotel room, you know, the government, and I'm going to be guessing right now, in the city of Saigon, they probably renovated maybe 8 to 10 big hotels, and where the military lived. And so when I got back to my hotel, I take off my fatigues, I put civilian clothes on.
But you would transit between the hotel and your work site in uniform.
Yes. And while I was there, another guy had a little Honda 50 he bought over there, and you know, it's been passed down. And when he left, I bought it from him. So instead of taking a bus, I drove my little Honda 50 to work. And then
was there ever any danger in that?
Well, I never had any danger except one time I flipped it in the rain in a monsoon. You know, that's about it. I didn't get hurt.
Traffic was kind of chaotic?
Oh, traffic and the pollution is terrible. But what I was leading up to, after you get off work, you go back to your hotel room and you change into civilian clothes. Every hotel that was run by the military, on certain dates, they have a certain menu to get you to go there or whatever, I don't know. Even though the food was dirt cheap, no matter what you ate. And like the Plaza Hotel, I went there on Sundays because they gave you steak and lobster there. And I went to another hotel and they give you bacon wrapped fillets or something. And you know, and I go to another hotel and it's up at the top, and they got a pool up there, and and it's just basically a drinking spot, you know. But oh yeah, it was, you know. To this day, when I tell my friends this story, because a lot of my friends were, you know, in the bush, they can't believe it. And why I was picked to go to Westmolrland'S headquarters, I don't know. And I mean, I don't think I was any smarter going through the school. I mean, we all talked about our grades. I mean, they were okay, you know. I mean, I wasn't flunking out or anything like that. I mean, I was above average, but for me to go to Westmolrland'S headquarters and why I was picked, and all the rest of the guys went to Europe.
Yeah, to be the only one.
Yeah, I was the only one.
Yeah.
And then
where did these other guys come from? And they had been there longer than you, or replacements as they came in?
Well, like, it was a mixed communication center. It was everything but Marines. You know, the Army, Navy, and Air Force. And you know, everybody, you know, when your time came up, they replaced you with another Air Force guy or another Army guy or whatever. But
so you were working with whatever branch of services happened to be there. But there were messages specifically for the Army, or did you deal with anybody's message?
Anybody. Everybody. We're just like one unit now.
Yeah, if that's the general's headquarters, there had to be a lot of brass around.
Oh yeah, you know, but you know, you don't salute in the combat zone. So you just walk around pretty freely, you see him or whatever. I was fortunate, you know, if you want to call it that. I mean, when the movie stars came in or whatever, celebrities, you know, John Wayne walked through there with his green beret uniform, you know, and he's walking with the general. And the general's aide, you might call him, he was the West Point Lonesome Inn carpenter. And I mean, the closest I came to Westmolrland, it would be about as far as from you as we're walking, right? And you know, I just said good morning or good afternoon or whatever. That's it. You just keep on going and things like that. But
what do you remember about his attitude toward all of you?
Well, you know, he was very pleasant. He always, you know, he just didn't walk by you and just, you know, be like a hard ass. He was very nice. He always said hello and whatever, but he wasn't his office was maybe 25 feet away from us. You know, you had to go outside to go to his office, but, you know, we never went to his office. You know, maybe our commander did, but he didn't.
Security, you said there were MPs out front.
All the way around.
And you had particular identification?
Well, you carried well, on your little pocket there's something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was plastic and it hooked up into your button, and you had it in your pocket of your fatigues, and then when you came up there, you just opened it and showed it to them,
Mm-hmm.
and they knew who you were.
Were there less classified areas in this facility? Maybe there were areas where people couldn't come into your area because they didn't have proper clearance?
Oh, you can't come into our area. Not zero.
Mm-hmm.
No. It was, if once if the door, the communication center's there, inside the communication center door, there's a list there, and it shows all the names of the people that have access or need to know to come in there. You could open up that window because somebody's knocking at the door, and you look and you ask them to identify themselves, and if you look at their name, it could be a 3-star general there looking at you like this with his stars, and you ask him to identify, and his name's not on there, and I just tell him, I said, sir, you don't have a need to know. I close the window.
Mm.
And I'm sure that when they're doing that, you know, it could be a GI inspection and they're testing you and stuff like that, but
Mm-hmm.
you got used to doing that kind of stuff, and you did it all the time, so it wasn't like whether it was a lieutenant or a first sergeant out there or a general, it didn't matter.
Mm-hmm. How much did you know during all this time about what was going on in the rest of the country, combat-wise? And how did you find out? How did you get your news?
Well, we knew everything because everything funneled into Westmoreland.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we saw the good. I mean, we read the good. If you want to sit there and read it, which I did sometimes, you could read some horrific stories. You know how they tortured some of our soldiers, what they did to them. You know, the reports and the combat. You know, missions. Oh yeah, everything.
How, without divulging classified information, obviously, how would you characterize the general type of messages that came back and forth? I mean, were they, because he's the overall commanding general, he didn't deal with really details.
No. I mean, you got anything from we need some nuts and bolts for some aircraft or some weapon, or we're missing these things, or we need more of this in supply, and I'm sure when they came in, it was addressed to who it's supposed to go to,
Mm-hmm.
and who approves it, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we had direct lines to the Philippines, Hawaii, and Washington D.C. and call it misuse or whatever, but they never got on us about it. If it was Sunday, I mean, there's a 22-hour difference
Mm-hmm.
in days, so I don't remember exactly now, but I'd go there and it'd be time for the Packers to be playing the Giants. And, we'd be betting over there, nickels and dimes. But I get on my teletype, and I used to know his name, so I said, hey, Frank, what's the score of the Green Bay Redskin game or something like that? And he'd go back, Ernie, it's such and such that first quarter. Everything's fine. I'll let you know second quarter. And it was that fast.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because when I'm typing here, he's receiving it there.
In tape form or in?
Both.
Okay.
And
That's because those are direct?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if it wasn't direct, that piece of tape you put in that window, or how did it get to wherever it needed to go?
Well, it reads it.
There was a machine
Yeah.
that somebody else used. Okay.
See, when we sent a message out, somebody typed it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a hard copy, but actually you had about 3 copies. But and then you had the tape. But when you sent it out, it's not being, even though the tape's going out and the machine's reading the holes, it's not going out on another hard copy in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
But when he receives it, he's receiving a hard copy and he's receiving a tape.
Mm-hmm. And if there was a mistake there, that's how you found out about it. They sent back, couldn't read such and such, and then you could make that. You could
Well,
make that
when
correction.
the kid did, or whoever's receiving messages, right there on the message, they're asking for service.
Mm-hmm.
So the minute that they're asking for service and the message is over, I get the tape and I get the hard copy, and they throw it in my box.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's my job for the next 12 hours, is correcting anything that went out of here or what we received, if I can do it.
Were those the shifts you worked? 12 hours?
Yes.
How often? 6 days, 7? You said you were there Sunday.
Well, if you're going to night shift, you get 3 days off. If you're going to day shift, you get 2 days off.
Okay.
And no, we were taken care of pretty good as far as that goes. But you had 12-hour shifts. And, and the officers that were there, they took care of us pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Aside from the military aspects of it, what kind of communication did you have at the hotel? Were there English newspapers, English TV?
I didn't watch any TV. I put it on Armed Forces radio, but at that time I didn't like country.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all they played when this thing about whatever that movie star's name that made Good Morning Vietnam.
Robin Williams.
Right, and they played that rock and roll. Yeah, I wish we would have had that when I was there. But all they played was country music, so I didn't listen to the radio hardly at all.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, they had the newspaper, the Army newspaper, whatever they want, Stars and Stripes, I think they called it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd listen to that. I mean, I'd read that once in a while, and once in a while I'd go to a place where, I guess it would be what do they call it, where all the Army guys or military guys go to.
The USO?
Yeah, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I did one day, it was right before Christmas, and I came out of my hotel and I got on my Honda 50 and I just saw all these cars going toward Tonsanoo. And I mean, just lines of them. And because I was in a little Honda 50, I could just go through and I wouldn't have to stand in line behind all the cars. Well, I finally stopped a guy in a Jeep and I said, "What's going on?" And he goes, "The Bob Hope Show." Mm. And I go, "Really?" He's going to be at Tonsanoo. I said, "Okay, man." Took off. Well, the closest I got was maybe 100 yards, from the stage. So I could hardly see anything, but I could hear. Mm. But so that was kind of interesting, to see that.
And Tonsanoo is where in relation to the building where you worked?
It's like a little suburb, of like Los Angeles, maybe about. I mean, they were connected, maybe about 5 miles at the most.
Was it an American facility, or just a Vietnamese air field?
No, it was our field.
Okay. Strictly military.
Well, no, I mean they had planes going out for civilians, but I'm sure security was pretty high out of there. Mm-hmm. But when I left country, I didn't leave out of Tonsanoo. I left out of Benoit, which was 22 miles east of Saigon. Mm-hmm. And that was an interesting sight there. They had these big covers. They were open, but they had roofs, and there was 3 of them. And one side was the people that were going back to country. The other ones were the ones that were just coming in, and the middle ones were the guys coming out of combat, coming back out of combat. And I looked at them, and I really felt sorry for them. I mean, they looked terrible, but they separated the incoming and the outgoing because why? It's just pretty obvious. They'd be making fun of them because you got 365 days and I got 0 and I'm getting out of here. Mm-hmm. But that was a kind of interesting place there, the way they handled that. The only thing that I did, I had to leave Saigon, roughly maybe 7 o'clock in the morning, and I had to go east about 22 miles. But the minute you start going east and get out of Saigon, it's all jungle, and it's a road, and you're on this bus going to where you're going. And when I got up that morning, I could have put on my good little dress shoes, the black ones, And I said, I thought about it, and I go, no, I'm going to put my boots on. And I had my duffel bag, and I went directly to the back of the bus next to the exit door. And I told myself, if anything happens these 22 miles, I lose my duffel bag, and I'm running to Benoit.
Was there ever any incident in Saigon that you remember that?
Everything that happened there, to me, it happened after the fact. I mean, there were, okay, in front of every hotel, all the way out to the first lane of the street. If it's a 2-lane road, the barricades were out to the nearest lane, the closest lane to the curb, and they had the 50-gallon drums, full of sand, and the MPs were out there with, either, whatever weapons they had. Sometimes they had machine guns or whatever, but the way they had them mounted. And there was always, they were Jeeps there with machine guns mounted on the back and stuff like that. But they still drove trucks or whatever try to run over the barriers and try to blow up the front end of a hotel or something like that. But all that happened when I wasn't there, again. Mm. But yeah, there was always, the reason they told you not to ride Sickolos is because, okay, you're right in front in that seat, and some GIs would be riding in front. The most you can get in there's 2, and the guy would jump off it at 20 miles an hour and run you right into the back of a bus or something. I mean, there was always incidents. Or you'd be in a bar, and all of a sudden the place got real quiet, like something going to happen, and that gets pretty scary. But nothing ever happened, But yes, there were bars that were blown up and things like that. But
okay, so you spent how long in this? What was your tour over there?
1 year.
So you're now getting ready to leave?
Yes.
What's going on?
Well, they give you 5 days to leave, and to clear all the paperwork. So from there, I had to. This is kind of another funny story. When I first got in country, they gave me everything. They gave me an M14. They gave me my nets for my, where I sleep, the beds, all this type of stuff. I mean, everything like if I was going to be my helmet, if I was going to be a combat soldier. They gave me all this in another duffel bag. Never used it, never opened it. So it sat there for a whole year, and it was all mildewed. So at the end, I didn't know it at the time. They call it whole baggage. You could send your footlocker to your next duty station. They don't inspect that at all. You just put your name on it, and if you're going to the next duty station, they deliver it there. So you can put anything in there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of guys did, whatever. But anyways, I never wanted to get into trouble, so I said they could have it back. I don't care. And so I gave them the whole duffel bag, and they asked me, what are you doing with all this? Don't ask me. You gave it to me. And then, well, we don't have any record of it. So I could have sent all this back in my footlocker, and, I could have taken that M14 apart and thrown it in there. But, I didn't. I said, no, I'm getting out of here, man. I'm happy. And that was it. But no going away parties and nothing like that. They were just, everybody was either the short guys are happy for you, the guys that had a long time, they don't want to talk about it. But we came back, and again, it was a civilian plane, and we went back to the same Air Force base. And
how long did it take?
I think it was something like 20-some hours.
And do you remember where you stopped?
I want to say Guam. And that was the only stop. And when we got back, I'm going to say it was early, maybe late afternoon, 3:30, 4 o'clock. And I didn't know, again, what's going to happen here. All I know is I'm going home. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how long they're going to hold us over there in Oakland.
What month? Year
June.
Of 66?
67.
67, okay.
I went over there in June 66.
Right. Okay.
And when we got to Oakland, the first thing they did is they measured me for my greens, because I didn't take any greens over to Vietnam. It was all khaki. So they measured me for my greens, and then they said, okay, go get in that other line over there and go eat. Well, we went in that other line, and they gave us, steak, baked potato, all that stuff. And then a couple hours later, they gave me my greens, already tailored. But I still wore my khakis home. There was guys there at Oakland that had these big cars like Cadillacs and Buicks, and they could pile like 6 or 7 guys into them and throw all their duffel bags, and they'd either take you to the Oakland airport or San Francisco airport. And so I went to San Francisco, flew to Los Angeles, and I got on the famous Bonanza airline from LA to here. Well, after being on the plane for 22 hours and going through your processing, and you're tired, right? So I get on the plane, and I just went to sleep from LA to Palm Springs. And then the stewardess hit me, and she says, do you know you're home? And I look at her and I go, we're in Palm Springs? And I go, yeah, man, it's home.
Yeah. And you were on leave?
Yes, 30 days, going to Panama. Now, before I left Vietnam, they gave me 3 choices. And they asked me, what are your 3 choices? And I said, West Coast, California, Hawaii, and Panama. Third choice is Panama. And the lieutenant colonel there that was in charge of it says, Ernie, you should go to Panama. And I says, why? I said, well, do you think working for Westmolrland, a 4-star general, he took care of you here? And I go, oh yeah, I'm real happy, yeah. He says, well, General Porter is commander-in-chief of the Southeast Command or something down in Panama. He says, you'll be working for him if you go down there. I said, I'm going to Panama.
Hold that thought. Is that because of your communication skills?
Who knows? Anyways, I get back down. I get to Panama, and we're not like for say in a on like an army base. It's called Corey Heights.
How did you get there?
To Corey Heights?
To Panama, yeah.
Flew there directly from Los Angeles. And well, Corey Heights is on a hill overlooking the Pan American Highway in the city of Panama. And naturally, it's on this side of the Panama Canal. You got to go over a bridge to go over the other side of the canal to the Fort Amador and another Air Force base. Anyways, I get down there, and this is a great story. I've been on leave for 30 days. Okay, even in Saigon, my belt buckle had tape on it. And I never polished my belt buckle. So anyways, I get down there, and so all my stuff is in this duffel bag. And I get down there about 10 o'clock at night. And I check in with the guy that's on CQ, and he throws me up in a bunk. I go to supply, they give me a rifle, and all this stuff, and is this your foot locker, your locker? Okay, fine. By the time all this is done, it's 11 o'clock, I'm tired. So I just about jump in the sack, and this guy next to me says, we're having an inspection tomorrow. And I go, I don't even remember having an inspection while I was going through school. And I didn't have any inspection in Vietnam. Now, I'm going to have an inspection tomorrow. Anyways, again, I tried my best. I got up a half an hour early. I tried to put all the stuff that was folded in my duffel bag. I tried to put it in my locker. I tried to put it in my foot locker. Anyways, I was gigged 32 times. Usually if you gig you once or twice, you're okay. But I was gigged 32 times, and this second lieutenant he told me that I was an embarrassment to the armed forces and the army and all this type of stuff. And he says, how could you? And I took the tape off my belt buckle, so it was like gangrene, or I don't know. And he says, look at this belt buckle. Don't you care? He's lecturing me, right? And I'm just standing there looking at him. I mean, I'm really mad. And but I still showed him his respect. And I waited for him to, put me down, tell me off. And then finally, I looked at the first sergeant that was with him. And I said, permission to speak to the officer here? He says, yeah, what do you have to say? Go ahead. So I looked at him and I said, sir, have you been to Vietnam? He goes, no. I said, well, you make sure that you polish your belt buckle when you get to Vietnam, especially if you're going to go out in the infantry. And see how long you'll last out there. Somebody might shoot you from the same side. So they don't want shiny belt buckles out in combat or anywhere in a combat zone. And so he thought I was a wise ass, so I didn't. So I was, my punishment was, it was Saturday, and I couldn't go to town if I wanted to. I was restricted to the barracks. So the Monday comes up, and I go down, and I report to the communications center, and the guy that was in charge there, the lieutenant colonel or whatever, he says, what did you do? So I explained to him the whole story like I'm telling you now. He says, oh, don't worry about it, everything will be okay. So everything went well. And to end this story on this second lieutenant, we have a GI inspection, and I know it's coming up. And I already told you about the window and access need to know. Well, by this time I'm a sergeant, and I run my own shift in the communications center. And that second lieutenant, he was from Oregon, ROTC, and he's sitting there reading his book. And there's a knock on our door. I look out there, and I can see the stars. And the guy told me his name, and there he's General such and such. And he says, I'd like to come into your communications center. And I looked at the list. He has no access. So I says, I'm sorry, sir, but you don't have a need to know. I slammed it shut. Bang, bang, there's more banging on the door. And so I walk away. I go back to my boys. And second lieutenant answers, he yells at me and says, you going to answer that door? I said, no, they don't have any. How do you know if it's the same people? I said, you're right, sir. Maybe it's somebody else. But I knew it was the same people because the way they were banging on that door. And so I looked again, and the minute I looked, it was the same people. So I shut it again. He says, well, who's out there? And I said, some general. He says, well, let him in. I said, no. You want him in? You let him in. He lets him in. He's got like 2 MPs and like 3 other guys with him. And they all walk. He lets them all in. And I'm just standing back there. I said, oh, I'm going to love this. Well, the MPs took him off for letting him in. And the general says, he tells me, he says, thank you, Sergeant, for not letting us in. And, what happened here? And I explained it to him. And they took him away. I never saw him again. But it was, down in Panama, there's, different, we're walking down the hill. The communication center was in a tunnel inside the mountain. It was probably 100 yards deep, and there were offices on both sides, one walkway here. And they had like a war room down there, and you could go in there. Like, what I did is, I had access to that war room. So what I would do is, when on my shift at night, I'd call 29 Palms, and they connected to me, my mom and dad, and talked to them. So that was always kind of nice and everything.
Why was it so protected? Why was it underground and all that?
Well, I guess that's just the way they wanted it. If some war broke out or whatever, that's just the way they had it, and they thought that was the best deal.
Because they felt somebody might at some point attack the canal, perhaps, or.
Oh yeah, well, we went down there when they had an overthrow of the government, and we went on alert and that type of thing. And another interesting story was I had to go run a one-man communications center somewhere down the canal, and they took me in a Jeep, and we drove up a hill like this about halfway up, and the canal was down there about 200 or 300 feet, and the window for the one-man communication, you can look out over the canal. And, you know, when I get in there, you know, you go up there with some water, you know, and some fruit, and you're going to be there until they come pick you up. But it wasn't going to be that long. But I look out my little window, and on the other side of the canal, and I'm sure they were on this side too, I see these big steel doors built into the side of the canal. And I'm going, wow, that's weird, you know, dirt, jungle, big steel doors. So finally, you know, I asked somebody when I got back to work, what's that? She says, they're all missile sites.
Mm.
You know, if there's anything that happens in the canal, those things will open up and they're going to take care of business wherever they have to. And anybody that goes to the canal, if your ship comes in, your ship better be in good relationship with the United States, because another boat goes out there to your ship, and you could be from Spain or whatever, and the MPs board your ship, and then they have a guy to drive that ship through. Those guys did not take their own ship through there.
Mm-hmm.
So
like
that,
a harbor master kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I saw the Queen Mary on her last voyage. She came around the Cape and was on the Pacific side, and she parked out there, and it was kind of interesting to see that. And
What was the general's name that was
and where in Panama?
Panama?
Porter.
Porter. Okay.
I don't know his first name.
Okay. And this tour was also a year?
No, 16 months. I was RA 3 years, so I had to serve 16 months down there.
And basically in the communications, same type of...
Yeah, same thing.
Was this the same kind of relaxed atmosphere you described in Vietnam? Except for this lieutenant?
No, everything was pretty good. We worked more, there was more civilians. I had to go work at Fort Amador for, I don't know, a month or something. And over there, the type were women. I guess they had G something ratings.
Mm-hmm.
And, but they were women and they were working in there. And
Military or civilian?
no, civilians. But up at Corey Heights, no, just military.
Mm-hmm.
And up on the hill up there, you know, there's a theater, there's a PX. And the Canal Zone, it was beautiful. You know, it was maintained by the United States, and they had a downtown place you could go, restaurants, everything, movie theaters. It was nice. It wasn't, you know, sometimes when the cruise ships would come through, and it was kind of neat to look at them and stuff. But
I meant to ask you, when you were in Vietnam, and the same would be here in Panama, how busy are you? How many messages do you get, say, in an hour? I mean, are there times when just nothing's going on?
in Vietnam, and that nonstop. And, you know, like when we change shifts, if a message was halfway through and I'm replacing you, I just take over that machine.
Mm-hmm.
But in Vietnam, nonstop. In Panama, no. No, it was a lot slower in Panama.
Mm-hmm. So there was times, could you read, do other things? What did you do? And were you 12-hour shifts again?
Yes. Well, because it was slow, or a holiday or something. In my 3 years in the service, I never celebrated Christmas or New Year's. I worked all those times, especially in Panama, because some of the guys were married and they wanted to be with their families. So I had my own shift, and you know, you kind of had a feeling, you know, how things go sometime, and you know what time everything's going to stop, because it's 3 o'clock in the morning in D.C. or something, and you know there's nobody going to be doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So you tell the guys that are on the graveyard shift with you, hey, go on home. So you know, go back to the barracks. But no, as far as what you do, you just sit around and we talked a lot. No, we don't bring any books in to read or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just, you know, everybody just shares stories and talk.
And as a sergeant, you're the shift supervisor.
Yes.
Was that any different in terms of what you did? Your own work?
Basically, what I did was when I became a sergeant and I had my own shift, I just, if anything special came in, and they'd call me over there, you know, some PFC or spec forward call me over there, and I would look at it and I said, no, you can handle it. Just handle it normally or whatever. You know, I walk over where guys are typing or whatever. Everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine. The only thing that I would do in the machines that would put everything, you know, in crypto, you might say, or to garble it so nobody could break our communications. We had these cards, and that every so many hours we had to replace them. And they had little holes in them, you know, the cards, I don't know, 3x6 or something, and they would just fit in these machines, and they had little holes in them, and that was our security. And every so many hours, I have to change those, and that was basically my responsibility. But in the end, like when I was going to leave, and another guy was going to take my place, then I would teach him how to do that type of stuff. But otherwise, we'd sit around and talk and whatever it was.
Any particular memorable incidents in Panama other than anything you've described?
Well, going down the hill for to eat, and it was probably maybe a quarter of a mile down the hill, and it was dark, and all, you know, maybe there was 10 of us, 12 were walking down the hill, and this guy just jumped, I don't know, maybe 10 feet in the air, and I go, what happened? And everybody stopped. And this guy let out a scream that you wouldn't believe. Well, what he did, there was a python across the street. It was about this big around. Anyways, he stepped on it. It was dark, but he just went off the road and went down. The other thing is they taught us riot control down there, which I'd never experienced before. And they asked for volunteers, and it's hot, it's humid, right? And there's this field down there behind the mess hall, probably the size of 2 soccer fields or 2 football. And they came out there and lined up 50-gallon drums with sand in them or water, I can't remember. And they brought all these pressure hoses out there, and you know, to control the riots would, you know, knock you down. And I said, no, they can't do that. So I volunteer. So we're out there in our fatigues and boots, and they're hitting us with this water. But it was refreshing. But I couldn't believe the power in those hoses. And then knock you right down. But that, and you know, we always got to go to the beach and swim if we wanted to. And they had shark nets out there, and you know, to keep the sharks out of that one area, so you could swim. And that's basically it.
When did that tour end?
That's when I got out in November 15th.
Of
68.
68. And so you went from Panama where?
Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Why?
Well, that's where I was going to do my paperwork and get out from there. I had to go there for like 2 days. I don't know why. I didn't do anything but lay it on a bunk.
So they flew you from Panama to Fort Jackson, processed your paperwork, and then where?
I flew to Los Angeles. And then I took a Greyhound bus to my sister's house in San Bernardino. And they called my mom and dad and said he's here. It's late at night, so they came that morning. And I'm laying there in bed, and my mother walks in and shakes me. She says, get up. And I said, why? She says, you're skinny and we got to feed you. So, and then they gave me a big party, welcome home party, and all that. So that was kind of nice. A lot of my uncles and aunts and cousins. And
did you have a reserve commitment?
Yes, but I never had to serve any. I didn't have to go to any meetings or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a time thing. When it overlapped, it was over.
Was there any talk or any thought about staying in?
Definitely not. One of the criterias of leaving Panama was I had to go I had a piece of paper, and I had to go listen to a man give me a re-up talk. And I told the first sergeant, I said, it doesn't matter what he says, I'm gone. I says, I'm out of here. I says, I've had good duties, I can't argue about that, but I'm not good. And then they offered me E6 and $10,000 to re-up. And I go, no, I don't think so. So I...
Can you, why? Or why not?
I had other goals in life and what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess we might as well get into the other part.
Well, again, you got out, no reserve commitment. You came back to Palm Springs,
Yes.
and okay, what
And
did you decide?
I went to work at the Palm Springs Youth Center, and then I enrolled at COD again for with the GI Bill and that type of thing. And then my buddy moved to San Diego. He was going to go to San Diego State, so I transferred down to San Diego City. And I always wanted to be a coach and a PE teacher. So I ended up bumming around at the beach for like 2 years. And I really didn't go to school. I was just having fun and working a little bit, you know. I worked at the Children's Hospital in San Diego. Basically, my title was a janitor or a custodian.
Mm-hmm.
But what I ended up doing, they used to bring a bunch of kids up from Tijuana to the Children's Hospital there in San Diego. And, you know, the kids missed their parents, and they'd be crying and all that stuff. And some of the nurses there, they didn't know Spanish. Well, I knew a little bit of Spanish, so they said, well, here's the place we keep the ice cream, and you go talk to them in Spanish and give them an ice cream. And so my job, after a while, it took me on a 4-hour shift. I was there part-time. I could do it in about an hour. And then they'd call me up, and I'd go talk to this little kid in Spanish and give him an ice cream or a candy bar.
And these were kids that were there for some kind of treatment.
Yes. Or some emergency service that
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't do down there. But so did that. Then I moved back to Palm Springs. And
Let me ask you one thing, because again, I should have done it when you were in the service. What kind of money did you make in the Army?
oh, Jesus. Well, I think my E5, if I remember right, I think I was making about between 150 and 180 bucks a month, but not any more than that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was my E5 pay.
But you didn't have a lot of personal expenses.
I didn't have any. I had a private room in the barracks because I was a sergeant, and they had this Panamanian boy who shined my shoes, did my belt buckle, and washed all my clothes and ironed them and things like that. Put them back in my foot locker. So it was no big deal. It was really kind of nice.
Mm-hmm. Did you send money home, or did you save it in some way, or did?
No. I'd like to party all the time and mess around, have a good time.
So when you got out and were in San Diego, you say you worked sometime just to kind of keep pocket money, and now your plans to become a coach. What?
Well, what happened was I moved back to Palm Springs in the summer, and I got a job in construction with my uncle, and I had a girlfriend who ended up being my wife.
Where'd you meet her?
At the college.
In
COD.
Okay. What's your name?
Karen. And so I came home one day, summer's almost over. I was all full of steam, man, and naturally after working 8 hours in a 110, 150 degree temperature, I had my share of beer. And she looked at me one day at dinner, and after I took a shower, and she says, "Do you really want to do this when you're 50 years old?" And I go, "No." She says, "Well, why don't we make a plan?" She's not my wife at this time, and she worked for General Telephone. And very intelligent girl.
What was her last name?
Lechner.
Karen Lechner. Okay.
So, and she went to Palm Springs High School too. She was 6 years younger than me. So, anyways, I re-enrolled at COD, and I think it was 70, let's say 72 or somewhere like that. So I ended up carrying like 15, 17 units for 1 year. And I transferred to Long Beach State. And there was a counselor there at COD He was Coach Garcia, who was all the basketball coach. And he helped me out quite a bit. And he told me basically you got three choices to transfer to. You could either go to San Diego State, because they have a good PE department, and Long Beach State, they have a good one, and SC. And I'm not going to SC. I can't afford it. So, and what he told me was, you got to go to a school that has a good job placement program. And I go, what does that mean? Well, that means when you graduate, how do they place their graduates? Do they get them jobs? And I said, well, what's the best one for that? And they said SC because they're alumni thing. Well, I can't afford to go to SC. And then and I said, well, who's number two? They said Long Beach. Okay, I'll go to Long Beach. So I went to Long Beach State.
Now, was this to get a degree in education so you could...
To get my BA and my teaching credential.
Okay.
So I went there. I went straight through there for 2 years. I went to summer school. I went to night school. I looked at it as a job. Mm-hmm. My wife was working. I was getting a GI.
When did you get married?
I think the first time, 73. I married her here at Lady of Guadalupe Church.
And this is Karen?
Yes. And so we moved up to Garden Grove. We got an apartment there. Went to Long Beach State. And like I said, I got the GI Bill. Worked for some construction. And
talk a minute about the impact of the GI Bill in terms of not only you, but your friends. That had to be a great...
Oh, I wouldn't have been able to do it without it. Mm-hmm. Without my wife working and I'm working, it came in handy. Mm-hmm. So there was no doubt that, it was worth it.
Because I know I used it, although I went through ROTC. I became one of those second lieutenants at Ohio State, and then I was...
I'm sorry that I...
Well, no, I understand perfectly. I just hope I wasn't like one of them. But I was in the Vietnam era from 67 to 69, and
you did two tours?
No, I did just one tour, but I was in from 67.
Oh, okay.
And the GI Bill paid for my master's degree, and that just amazed me. It didn't cost me other than to go there and back and forth, and I can even claim mileage. I was just astounded at the availability of that. So you got your teaching degree, credential.
Yes. And
when did you graduate? Do you remember?
75. And I did my student teaching at Huntington Beach High School. And while I was there, I was on the JV football staff, and I was the head JV soccer coach.
Now, was your major physical education?
Yes.
Did you have to have a minor or anything else?
No, they had a single subject, Ryan. They called it back then. Mm-hmm. They said they wanted you to specialize, But so I did. Mm-hmm. And after I did my student teaching and everything, and I talked to my master teacher at the university, and I wanted to go back there and to my cum file to see what my master teacher, or two of them said about me at Huntington Beach, and then I wanted to see what the teacher said about me at Long Beach State. So I went there to look at that, and while I was there, one of the professors there said, "Hey, Ernie, come here." So I came into his office. He says, "I think I got you an interview." I said, "What?" I said, "I didn't ask for an interview." He said, "I'm not even ready. I don't really have my resumes." "Well, you're not going to need your resume." I go, "Okay, what's going on?" He says, "It's a junior high job. I know you want to be at the high school, but I want you to do an interview at this job. I mean, it's a stepping stone," he said. He says, "If you're asking me, I think you should take the job." I said, "Okay." So I said, "Where is it?" And he says, "Chino." And I said, "Chino, okay." And I thought he said Chico, Northern California. Mm-hmm. And so I said, "Well, when's the interview?" And he says, "It's 10 o'clock. And he says, "It's at 1. And I said, "How can I get to Chico in 3 hours? That's above Sacramento. I don't have a plane." And he goes, No, Chino." So I said, okay. So I got instructions how to go there, and I called my wife at work, and I had to get in a suit, and drive from Garden Grove out to Chino. And anyways, I got there in time, and I went through the interview. But before I went in the interview, this other guy was walking out from Long Beach State, And he was a great guy. I said, well, sure, he's going to get the job. So, you know, I looked at it like no pressure. So I went in there for an experience of interviewing. And I went through the whole interview. At the end of the interview, you know, I asked the vice principal and principal, I said, this is my first interview for a job, and what I'd like from you is, could you tell me how I did, number one, and what corrections could you make on my answers or how I did, so I can improve myself in the next interview. And the principal looked at me and he says, well, I'm going to tell you like this, he says, did you ever have a teacher at Long Beach State named Mr. Sanifer? And I said, yes. He was my cadet teaching instructor. And he says, well, look, Randy and I were classmates at Long Beach State. I pitched at Long Beach State on the baseball team, and Randy was one of my teammates. And the guy that got you the interview, he was the head coach at Long Beach State. And I pitched for him. So we know each other. I'm going to call Randy, and if the other guy already said you were good. And he says, but Randy, if Randy says you are good, then 10 o'clock you can expect a phone call from me. You come down and sign your contract. I go, what? And I mean, everything was happening so fast. Anyways, the next morning I get up at 10 o'clock. I'm waiting. I was just waiting for this call, right? And he calls me up and says, Randy says you're good, so come on down and sign the contract. And I knew that Randy was going to say something good about me because I did a good job in his class, luckily. And I liked him and he liked me. And I went down to Chino and I signed my contract for 3 years. Well, not for 3 years, but they gave me 3 years of credit because, or I ended up on 3 years on the pay scale because they gave me 2 years of credit for being in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was pretty good, not to start at the bottom of the pay scale.
Yes.
So that was another benefit of going in the service. So I was there for 3 years, and I coached a little flag football team there for the 7th graders and 8th graders, and coached girls basketball and soccer,
And taught PE classes.
and taught PE classes. That was the department head there for PE.
What were you making?
Oh, I think back then maybe $7,000, $8,000. Yeah.
Not bad.
Well, then my football team there, it's flag.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 years I was 29-1. The first 2 years I was undefeated. So I was in church one Sunday, and I didn't know him, but I knew who he was. The head football coach at the high school right up the street from us that we fed. He says, hey, Ernie, you know who I am? And I go, yeah, you're Coach Munger. He says, well, heard a lot of good things about you. I got a position on our staff. It's on the freshman level. If you want to coach football at the high school level, love to have you. I said, well, I have to check with my principal. He said it was okay, blah, blah, blah. And then I interviewed for a position, the PE position at the high school, and I got it. So I think the next 10 years, 10 years, I was there at Don Lugo.
So you and your wife were living in Chino?
Ontario, right next door. We bought a home there.
Any children?
No, I've never had children. I have, I married into a family, my second marriage, and she had 2 girls and a boy. And we've been married now for 29 years.
And her name?
Judy. And so from Don Lugo, moved over to Chino, the arch rival.
Now, did you always just coach freshmen at Don Lugo, or did you move up?
No, I moved up. I ended up coaching the freshmen in baseball too, and in the beginning, and I coached varsity girls soccer. There, I was fortunate enough to coach my 2 daughters at the high school level. Mm. Then I was on the varsity staff in baseball, and I was on the varsity staff in football. And then that Coach Munger, he transferred over to Chino, asked me to go with him. I didn't go with him the first time he asked. Then a couple of years later, I went back over there, and we made a good run over there. We were at Chino. We ended up being in the playoffs 10 years in a row, and we won a CIF title there, and we were in the finals another year, and probably in the semis about 3 times. So we had a pretty good run there.
Mm-hmm. I need to go back and ask you one thing about when you got out of the service in '68. the Vietnam home front was beginning to be a bit chaotic, and of course that went on through the early 70s. Did you have any experiences, and what was your attitude about it? What was your reaction?
You know, I don't know. My friends that I had here in Palm Springs, and I know a couple of them there were on that side. They never brought it up to me personally. I'd go to parties and nobody would really talk politics or war, and I don't know. They just maybe I was fortunate or whatever. And when I was walking around or anything, there were times where I wore one of my fatigue shirts, you know, tops, you know, because I had a couple extra of them. The rest of my stuff I gave to my nephew. But that way, I didn't experience that much.
Well, you said when you were in Vietnam, you thought at that time we were probably doing a service, or you felt that there was something good about us being there. Has that changed? Your sense of that as...
I hate to admit it, but yes, it's changed. You know, because I look at now, I have crazy ideas. See, I feel right now, maybe even in Vietnam back then, and maybe now with Iraq, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, you know, somebody would ask me, Ernie, how would you handle it? And the way I would handle it, that gentleman over there, he runs the SEALs. You over here, you run Special Forces. This guy over here runs recon or something like that. I'd get our elite people that want to do this thing. I'd never put all these people, you know, boots on the ground or whatever. I'd have these special ops people that would go to these places, and whatever the problem is, take care of it. We're not, and then with the drones, to whatever, with planes, and take care of business that way. I just think that, you know, today with all our technology and all this, and that I just don't believe how they can kill us and kill women and children, and we can't do the same thing because it's inhumane and we're democratic. And I mean, if it's war, it's war. I don't.
Well, I guess that's one of the questions. Is it really war?
Oh, I think so. They hate us.
Yeah.
I think they, you know, that Muslim sect or whatever, and those people that believe the way they believe, they hate us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I don't think we can change them.
Yeah.
You know, without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, throughout our history, it's always been, you know, like, everything's religion.
Mm-hmm.
All these wars that we have and people's beliefs, and, you know, just...
And that's a pretty intractable, inflexible attitude, and you're not going to change their minds. Yeah. I got a couple questions when we get back to that, but I want to go on. You coached at Don Lugo, and then you said you went back over to Chino.
I spent 17 years at Chino. And that's where I retired from, and there I took over the work experience program. I had about 250 kids in that.
And work experience at the high school level is kind of a job placement program where they shadow.
No, what it is that these kids that want to work in the community, you know, whether they work, you know, in Chino we had a lot of dairies, and if you want to, you know, family or whatever, you want to work on a dairy, you want to learn from your daddy or whatever, I'll give you credit for that, and I give them a couple assignments that they have to turn into me. I only meet with them once a week. If you want to work at Burger King, or, you know, you work at a theater, or, you know, you want to work retail or whatever, I have to go make a job visit, make sure everything's okay, there's no problems. And that's basically it.
And it may be also because there are kids who, because of family situations, almost have to work.
Yes.
And this allows them to at least stay in contact with school. And at some point they get a diploma.
They get credit,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, toward graduation.
Mm-hmm. So it kind of keeps them in the system, but allows them to fulfill their needs. How long did you do that?
Oh, probably about 10 years, my last 10 years.
When did you retire?
2007.
And that's when you came back here, or
No.
you still live?
I lived in Chino. My wife bought a daycare center with my daughter, and then she was commuting from. My daughter lived in that area, and then my wife was commuting from Chino to Lake Elsinore, and they bought a daycare center together. And so, after a year, of commuting for her, I had like a couple of years before I was going to retire. I said, "Oh, well, let's just sell our house and we'll buy something over here or rent something, and I'll commute to Chino." Mm-hmm. So that basically what we did, and then when I retired, she gave me a retirement dinner and all this, and one of the things that was really neat about Chino, the small little community, and there was a bass restaurant there, and excellent Central Bass, and the owners of it, I taught them both at Don Lugo. They took over the business from their parents, and so they knew me and everything, and so we held my retirement dinner there, and it was probably 100 people there or whatever, and people gave talks, and it was kind of nice. Mm-hmm. And then after I retired, I bought a motorhome, and we went across country, all the way back to East Coast, all the way up to New York, and then across the Dakotas and into Oregon. And my wife fell in love with Corvallis. She thought it was like a Saturday Evening Post town. So I pulled into the Benton County Fairgrounds there. They have an RV park there, and we parked a motorhome there. So from August to December, we were looking on the computer places to buy, and we finally found a place. And in the meantime, being a coach and whatever, we have season tickets to the Beaver games. So we found a little town south of Corvallis, about 16 miles, called Monroe, and it's 6 acres. It sits up on a hill, and it's kind of nice. I think I bit off more than I can chew. I should have just bought a place with about 2 acres, but anyway, so been living there ever since 2007. You interviewed my buddy Jimmy Pendergast, mm-hmm. and he was a medic over there, and we've been friends. And every year I come down for his golf tournament for his son. So that's what I'm doing here. We're going to play in the golf tournament tomorrow.
Well, I'm glad we hooked up. You mentioned 2 daughters. Were they the only 2 children, and they were from your second wife's family?
2 daughters and a son.
Okay. And what are their names?
Barbara, and Susan, and Daniel.
And what are they doing?
Daniel's in the computer field. And
where does he live?
Pardon me?
Where does he live?
Oh, you know where Oakhurst is?
Oakhurst.
It's east of Fresno.
Okay.
He lives in that area there, and he commutes to Fresno for his job. My daughter's over here in Marietta, and she's the principal at an elementary school.
Good. And the other daughter is the daycare?
No, the other daughter's back in North Carolina, so we hardly see her at all. She's clear across country.
How'd she end up there?
Who knows? But she's married and has like 3 kids, so,
At this point, and you've explained why you're down here, have I missed anything? Is there anything else you can think of we ought to know?
The only thing is that I really believe in my heart that when a kid gets out, I believe what they do in Israel, that every kid should serve his country. And this might be a prejudice statement. I don't think women should be in combat, but I think the experience, the dedication, the work ethic that you can learn from the military is very good. And I feel today's young kids do not have that. and I'm sorry to say that. And it's a microwave world. You know, we don't spend that much time to learn things. You know, it's all instant gratification. And I just wish that, you know, maybe, I just don't wish that, I wish we'd still stop going to all these wars.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I think the experience that you get in the military, I think that it's worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. And certainly there are some benefits, not only in terms of the discipline it teaches you, but there are some other benefits that help you later on.
The VA's been good to me.
Mm-hmm.
They've helped me out quite a bit. And I don't want to talk much about this, but I had cancer, prostate cancer, and I didn't know it at the time, but they said if I was in Vietnam and because of Agent Orange or whatever, and if you get Agent Orange, I mean, if you get prostate cancer, there's other illnesses too. And I did get prostate cancer, and because I was in Vietnam, they took care of that.
And you're in good
Well,
health.
I'm at the tail end of it right now, and so maybe, I mean, my PSA's fine, everything's good, but my last appointment is in May. So
Well, we wish you well, and we certainly thank you for your service. And I'm glad we got this opportunity to talk to you.
well, I hope it's good.